Firstly, my name's Mitch Everingham, and I've been living in Switzerland for a little over a year now. My wife and I moved in March 2021, so sort of mid-pandemic, which felt like a crazy time to be moving across the other side of the world, but we really felt God's leading throughout that decision. We moved for my wife's job. So my wife's name is Suze, and she completed her PhD in Sydney, studying in the field of plant ecology. She was looking at how plants have been adapting to climate change around Australia, and she had an opportunity to come to Switzerland for 2 years and work with a climate change research institute over here and a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Bern. And so we've been in Bern for the last 14 months or so. We're really enjoying our time here. So that's how we were led to Bern. Prior to that, I'd been working for a church called St. Faith's Anglican Church in Narrabeen, Sydney, for 6.5 years. So I'd been on the staff team there as one of the assistant pastors across that time, and that was still is a beautiful church, a church that we hold very close to our hearts. It was the church I grew up in, and who sent me off to Bible college, and then took me on board on their staff team after that. And so that was a big decision for us to make. But I think in going, we realized that there was an opportunity to see if God was leading us to doing mission longer term over in Europe as well. And so part of what I want to share with you over the next 10 or 15 minutes is just some of the things that my wife and I have seen during our time in Switzerland, some of the opportunities there are for the gospel in this place. And so that's my hope in this short time. The first question that Matt's given me is, what has it been like living in Switzerland? What's been good? What's been difficult? I think in a nutshell, living in Switzerland has been beautiful. If you've seen any photos of anything in Switzerland, chances are it looks absolutely stunning. I feel like everywhere we go, every corner you turn around, things are generally very pleasing to the eye, and the quality of living there is amazing. It's really good. The healthcare is great. The transportation is great, and so there's plenty of things that we're really thankful to God for. And I'll come back to how that plays in, I guess, in terms of a faith context a little bit later on. But generally speaking, that's the context we're in. There's lots that's been good. We've found a great church family. So we're part of a church called River Life International Church. It's an English-speaking international church in the middle of Bern, which is the capital city of Switzerland. And that's been a huge blessing for us as well to have some Christian fellowship in our own language. And I think that leads me to the difficult part. The difficult part has been the language. And so the Bern is bilingual. It's German and French. About 80% of people speak German, 20% French. And so we've been slowly learning German. And the real difficulty I think we've found is that the dialect, so Swiss German, it feels almost 50% different to regular German. And Swiss German is only an oral language, not a written language. And so that's proved difficult in terms of practicing our German. If people speak some kind of English to any level, we often will try and speak to them in German, and they'll go, oh, and start speaking to us in English because they prefer English to regular German. So there's more that I could unpack there behind for some of the reasons behind that, but that's I guess a bit of the context and one of the things that we have found quite difficult in terms of settling in and feeling at home in Switzerland. So that's some context there. Next question I've got is, do you think Switzerland is spiritually needy, and what might be some indicators of the need? In brief, Switzerland is in dire need of the gospel. And I say that coming from Sydney, a place where that is close to my heart and where I've always felt like there's a big gospel need. And God, I think, has opened my eyes in Switzerland to just how many gospel resources there actually are in Sydney compared to a lot of other Western parts of the world. So some some things, I guess, anecdotally to show that to you is my wife and I, about 4 months ago, started our church calls them life groups, like a small group Bible study in our home as part of the River Life International Church that we attend. And a few weeks after we started that, I had a pastor from a local Swiss church contact me and ask if he could come along and visit our group. And I felt like that was a strange request. So I met with him and we spoke about that before he attended. And he basically told me that the church that he works in, he's the only Christian on staff. This is an evangelical Reformed church, and he felt like he was the only Christian on his staff team. The reason for that is the church and the state are heavily linked. If you're a Christian, 10% of your taxes go to paying the church's wage, and so a lot of the pastors they go off to a secular university and study theology there for a number of years, do a degree just like any other degree, and then are given a job in a evangelical church. And so being a pastor in a lot of Swiss Reformed churches is just like doing any other job. You don't have to have any relationship with God. There's no requirement other than the lip service of saying, yes, I'm a Christian, in terms of the process of discerning whether someone should be in pastoral ministry or not. So that's been incredibly eye-opening. This pastor and his wife have been coming to our small group for over 3 months now, and are feeling like this is the first time they've had fellowship in years. They're coming to an English-speaking group instead of a group in their own language because they don't have that fellowship elsewhere. And so that's to me been one of the biggest eye-opening experiences. And that's one example, I think, of many that I've heard from our time in Switzerland. The church that we go to is it's about 150 people, 150 members, and a third of them are Swiss. And as you get to know a lot of them and hear some of their stories, and I've asked a lot of them how come they go to an English-speaking church, and they say, well, it's one of the only ones in the city that actually teaches the Bible. There's I think the context needed to see why Switzerland is in dire need of the gospel. There's one evangelical Bible college that's quite small and not particularly well resourced in terms of the amount of content and classes that they can deliver, and so there is a big need in Switzerland for the gospel and for the good news of Jesus to be proclaimed to people in their own language here as well. In terms of some of the opportunities that my wife Susan and I have had to serve here, there's a lot of opportunities, and so we've had to choose from the bountiful options before us in terms of where we could invest our time. The main things that we've been involved in terms of in the church context have been youth and kids ministry in terms of a week-to-week basis. So Susan's helping to lead the children's ministry. I've taken on responsibility for being the youth pastor in a voluntary capacity over the youth ministry at our church. We're leading the life group, the small group that I've already mentioned, and then I've been on the preaching team as well, so preaching on an occasional basis in our Sunday services. Outside of that, we've been involved in the university Christian groups. I've given a number of talks and seminars there at the university as well over the last 12 months, and that group's primarily composed of people that aren't Christian. So it's an evangelistic group. It's somewhere that people are invited to come and hear different talks on different topics. It's a place for people to find some kind of community that is in English, because a lot of people move, they're able to do their uni course in English, but outside of that, they don't have any other points of contact. And so across that time, we've made a number of friends, but we've also seen a young student from Pakistan who has become a Christian. She was baptized and started attending River Life Church as well. And so that's been a big sign of God's grace. And how he's at work in this place at this time. And so when you pray in a moment, you can give thanks for her as well. I can't share her name because she's now returned to Pakistan, and it's a hostile place to be a Christian. But if you could pray for her and for her perseverance in the faith, that would be great. So there's a few opportunities that we've had to serve. We're also in the process of getting a ministry to refugees off the ground in Bern that Susan and I will be leading, God willing. Particularly at the moment, given the situation in Ukraine as well, there's countless refugees pouring into Bern. Every week we have a dozen or so new refugees joining our church, looking for some kind of fellowship that's in English rather than in German. And so there's a big need there. So we're looking to set up a meal ministry, so once a week serving a hot meal and conversation to people in the city. That'll be open to obviously refugees of all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of situations, not just those from Ukraine. But that's a ministry that's been on the heart of many people in the church for a long time. So your prayers for that as well would be great as we seek to set that up in the coming months. What's God been teaching us about mission in Europe? I think going back to what I mentioned before, the need, not just in Switzerland, but in general across Europe is significant. There's a need for the gospel everywhere. Every person on this planet obviously needs to hear the gospel equally. But in Europe, it feels more hostile, I've found, compared to what I experienced in Sydney. I think I think probably the best way that I can explain that is, in Sydney, I'd meet people that weren't Christian, and it would come up that I was a pastor, and often people were either curious about what that meant, or they're like, oh, okay, and just, if they didn't want to engage with that was fine. But here, whenever I speak to people and they're like, okay, what were you doing back in Sydney? And I mention that, there's an obvious, recoiling almost from the conversation. There's a hostility that I hadn't experienced before. I've quickly learned how to try and navigate those conversations with a little more sensitivity, because there's a lot of people that holds a lot more baggage for. And so I could say a lot more about that, but I think for now that probably says enough. That there's this general hostility, particularly among younger people that we're interacting with. There's a real skepticism about the motives for people of lots of faith, but particularly for Christians, and that makes it very difficult to try and sow seeds of grace amongst people, to have meaningful conversations, and requires, I think, long-term faithful presence within communities. And so the method of trying to bring the gospel to people in Europe is one that I think is going to take a lot of time and a lot of investment to see people change their minds and hearts by God's grace. And then finally, how can we be praying for you? I've already mentioned a couple of ways with a few of the different ministries. I think also just for Susan and I, in terms of discerning where God's leading us longer term, where we should go, and how we can follow the lead and the prompting of His Spirit in our life, and that we would be obedient to Him. So for us, that would that would be a real blessing if you could pray for that. Also, if you could pray for our church. So for River Life Church, they're seeking a new senior pastor at the moment. And so, that it seems to be it is one of the larger churches in the city, the only English-speaking church. And so it's, I think it's quite a crucial church for the spiritual health of Bern. And so if you could pray for the church as they seek the right person for that position of senior pastor, that would be great. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope that this has been helpful for you in learning a little bit more about the spiritual context of Switzerland and Bern in particular, and that it provides some fuel for your prayers.